I want to get into the NBA playoffs. And to me, what we have seen so far in such a very early NBA Western and Eastern Conference Finals is a dynamic force in the Eastern Conference. And I think when you look at Miami, you look at Boston, these are two teams that are very connected in so many different ways. And you look at Miami, which has been a championship pedigree team ever since Pat Riley has taken over this team and really rebuilt the forces of LeBron James, Chris Bosh, and Dwayne Wade. So when they brought in Jimmy Butler and they brought in all these different players to band together to eventually take on these Eastern Conference powerhouses, and not many of them, that's for sure. The Boston Celtics, in the last couple of years, had to figure out how they could compete with a team like the Miami Heat. And going into this series, you look at the defensive side of the ball and the offensive side of the ball, and both teams very good on both sides. But going into this series, you would question who had the upper hand. And in game number one, Miami came out strong, hit shots, couldn't miss the three-point shot, and were very dynamic defensively, especially in the second half, keeping Jaylen Brown and Tatum off the offensive games that they have had in this whole NBA playoffs. But not only that, when you compare the coaches, you look at a rookie coach with Boston and a coach that's been there with Miami for over 10 years, a very dynamic coach, a championship pedigree coach. You look at this series and you would think Miami had the advantage. But throughout the playoffs, when Boston has been healthy, they have been as dynamic defensively as any team we've seen in a very long time. So going into this series, a lot of people are trying to figure out who has the edge, who's the better team. And you look at the rosters, and Miami has Tyler Hero, who's the sixth man of the year. Jimmy Butler, who's one of the best defensive, more underrated defensive perimeter players in the NBA. Victor Oladipo is finally healthy. Bam Adebayo, sensational big man defender. I would compare him to Draymond Green, just a little bit bigger. But this series, we expect to be neck and neck. And in game number one, like I was saying, Miami took advantage of everything Boston couldn't do. Maybe it was because Marcus Smart wasn't playing in the game, or Williams or Al Horford wasn't playing in the game. But they completely dominated, and yes, Boston made a run in the fourth quarter, brought it back to an 8-point lead, and couldn't get over the hump. Game number two, this was a different Boston team. You have Marcus Smart, Al Horford, both Williams playing in the game. You saw what Boston could do defensively against a dynamic offense like the Miami Heat.
Miami, it always has come down to what team offense they can get, because the depth is there for Miami. We haven't even seen the best of guys like Duncan Robinson yet, Caleb Martin, who had a nice year in the regular season, and some of these other role players that haven't gotten the big minutes. Jimmy Butler scored almost half of Miami's points. Now, they distributed the ball well, they balanced it out well, but when guys like Oladipo were off like they were in game number two, where they weren't the same, just 14 points, then you take away that second level, the star factor. The Celtics have the stars, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum. The question with them was always the depth. Now, their depth has played phenomenal throughout the year, but it's not like the same level as Miami's depth, especially if they have all those injuries. But now, once they got that depth back and they got them balanced again, it showed what a team the Celtics could be. Al Horford came back with 10 points and defense that was very good. Peyton Pritchard off the bench, Grant Williams, and Marcus Smart's offense was a huge reason for game two. 24 points, near triple-double. The Celtics have that kind of depth. If they can outplay Miami's depth like they did in this game, that's a big, big boost for them.
If you can get the points from Marcus Smart, 30 to 25 points, Boston is going to be unstoppable in this series. If you're getting Jason Tatum numbers between 23 and 27 points, Jaylen Brown numbers between 18 and 21, and then you're getting Marcus Smart, who's not a real offensive player. He's obviously the defensive player of the year. And you're getting something between 20 and 25 points a game from him. I think Boston's going to be very unstoppable because of their defensive type of game that they produce, and why they're so dynamic is the way they play defense. Ever since they brought Derek White at the trade deadline, this team has just completely been a defensive prowess team. They're getting so much defense from so many different parts of the court, not only through the front three with Jason Tatum and Marcus Smart and obviously Jaylen Brown, but they're getting it from the perimeter. And that, to me, makes them so witty and so dangerous. Marcus Smart could defend 5 positions. We've seen him defend the 5. We've seen him defend the 4, the 3, the 2, and the 1. So Marcus Smart, you can move him around on the perimeter and play his game as dynamic as he could be in every type of way. So going into this series, I expected Boston to be that strong defensive team, but I didn't think they were going to be that defensively dynamic in the second game, as well as what they did to the Miami Heat in the fourth quarter of game number 2. So I was very surprised. I've been very impressed with the Celtics defense throughout the playoffs and the regular season. This is one of the best defenses I've seen in a very long time. I'm talking about 10, 15 years. I remember those Bulls teams in the 90s and how very good defensively they were with Dennis Rodman, Scottie Pippen, and Michael Jordan. These guys were all top-end defensive players. And I wouldn't say Jason Tatum and obviously Jaylen Brown are anywhere close to Scottie Pippen and Michael Jordan. But Marcus Smart, what he has done so far as a defensive player, a person that I didn't think was as dynamic as the league thought he was in the middle of the season. I didn't know he was going to be the defensive player of the year. But when you look at the numbers and you look at the quality defensive game that he has on all different sides, from the 1 and the 2 as a guard, and then even playing and defending the 3 and the 4 and sometimes the 5. It is an amazing feat on what this Boston defense has really produced throughout the season.
Udoka, as a coach, too, has definitely implemented it to the younger players, too, because Tatum, throughout his career, was probably an improved defender year to year, but was never thought of as a great one. And then Jaylen Brown, he was drafted for his defense, and it showed it to even higher level. Now Marcus Smart, now Defensive Player of the Year, but even some of the bench players, Miami's depth hasn't been the same in this series because of that. And Eric Spoelstra's the better coach, so he'll adjust, he'll find a way. His coaching with this defensive scheme and the way Pat Riley is drafted have really fit to what they're trying to do. So I expect some kind of different looks. I expect Duncan Robinson, guys like him, to play more. So it'll be up to Udoka to make those kinds of adjustments there. But the Celtics' depth is outplaying Miami, and that's a big difference when it comes to 1 seed versus the 2 seed roster level. You saw Dallas do it against Phoenix. That might be the avenue for the Celtics against Miami.
Speaking of Dallas, a team that I expected to put a lot of pressure on this Warriors team going into the Western Conference Finals, and a team like the Warriors who really had problems against Memphis until they took Ja Morant out of that series. I thought Dallas was going to give this team a run for the money. But in game number 1, we saw a complete domination, especially against Luka Doncic. And something that Phoenix couldn't do throughout the semifinals of the Western Conference and shutting down Luka Doncic, that was something that I believe Golden State and Steve Kerr wanted to do, was shut down their superstar. And boy, oh boy, did they do that, especially in the second half of the game. Luka Doncic could not hit the shots that he hit throughout the series against Phoenix, and that gave a more dynamic offensive team like the Golden State Warriors opportunities to score in so many different ways, not only from Jordan Poole, not only from Steph Curry or Klay Thompson, but even some of the bench players. So this series, if this continues going the way it did in game number 1, I don't think Dallas has any chance of beating Golden State.
The Mavericks, I was mentioning the depth earlier with the Suns. They needed that depth to show up there. It didn't show up in this game, and Luka Doncic didn't have his usual 30-point performance and making all these insane three-pointers that he did in game 1. Golden State definitely showed the other end of that too, where they had 7 different guys in double figures, and I was worried about their depth coming in because they really weren't showing it throughout the playoffs. If Memphis had a healthy Ja Morant, I think they win that series because they win a couple of those close games. Now, granted, they lost game 1 with Ja Morant, but still, Golden State really hasn't been the complete all-around team that the Celtics have been in the Heat, and Dallas looked like they were showing flashes of that. So if the Warriors could play like this, yeah, this is going to be over quickly, but this is also the typical letdown game. You saw the Dallas Mavericks, the way they blew out Phoenix in game number 7. Inevitably, you're not going to play like that again. I'm not too worried about them yet. Luka Doncic, yeah, a little off. I think he'll make his adjustments. The Warriors' defense isn't menacing that I'm worried about they're going to be able to do this game to game. And I do think Dallas' depth, if it can play as well as it did against Phoenix, should be able to at least play consistently well. So I will not count them out just yet.
I believe that what we saw in game number 2 wasn't something hidden for what we know what Luka Doncic is. Luka Doncic had a better game number 2, played sensational. And really, when you look at Golden State in this specific series, you need to shut down the superstar player for the Dallas Mavericks. And we saw throughout this series against Phoenix, guys really stood up. Jalen Brunson, he played very well. Other semi-star players like Tim Hardaway Jr. I say semi-star because Tim Hardaway has glances of being a star in this league. He's not his father. Tim Hardaway, which, by the way, signed a contract with the New York Knicks. He's a new scout for the New York Knicks. Wow. So congratulations to Tim Hardaway. Now he's working with the New York Knicks. I'm not surprised.
Maybe that's why all those Knicks were at the Dallas game. Now it all makes sense.
All
full circle.
Tim Hardaway Sr., who is a Hall of Famer, is now working for the New York Knicks. Going back to this series, I expect the Golden State Warriors to play even more deeper in their roster because they have so much depth. And I know you say they're a 3-player team.
The way they've been playing in the playoffs.
I disagree. I think this team has a tremendous amount of talent on and off their bench. Now, I look at their roster. You look at Wiggins. You look at Steph. You look at, obviously, Jordan Poole. You look at Klay Thompson. You look at Draymond Green. That's 5 players right there that you could start in any rotation and be a superstar rotation. Gary Payton II, Gary Payton Jr. This is a kid that has played well in the playoffs, that obviously got hurt and I guess you could say sucker punched.
Slap on the head, but then it landed on his elbow too, so it's a double whammy for him.
But a kid that a lot of people thought was not any good. He was a second-round draft pick. Obviously not the same player his father was, but he's been a dynamic player throughout the playoffs. Andre Iguodala, they brought him back, a defensive type of player who's a good leader, especially on and off the bench. Another guy that will play a big part if they move forward in the playoffs, especially in the Western Conference Finals. Otto Porter, who hasn't had a very good playoff, but another guy who has been dynamic throughout his career. So this is a very good, more depth type of bench we've seen the Golden State Warriors have over the years. So I really believe that the Golden State Warriors have everything and every type of piece to take this team all the way to the finals and win another championship. The question is Steph Curry the same Steph Curry? Is Klay Thompson 100% healthy? And is Jordan Poole the real deal? That only Golden State can answer, and they have to stop Luka Doncic because this guy, if he scores 40 points in a game, there's a very good chance that Dallas Maverick team is going to pull away and win that series if he does.
I also look at the size, too, because Dallas's size was a big reason they were able to do well against Phoenix inside as well. Guys like Dwight Powell, Dorian Finney-Smith, Max Kleber, more of an offensive forward, but still good size, too. Being that Golden State doesn't have Wiseman, Kevon Looney's a solid center, but nothing special. Then your next big guy is who? Draymond Green, who's a great defensive player, but still kind of undersized, though, too. So if Dallas could get that kind of advantage back, too, they could definitely help out Luka Doncic and not make him the center of attention all the time where he's going to be getting double teamed, triple teamed by these defensive players. Also, Klay Thompson, his defense, will they be able to find that again? That was the biggest thing I worried about off of his injury too, because Wiggins is a very good defender and Poole's a pretty serviceable defender. He's not great, but if they can get some level of that back, that's going to be a big step forward for Golden State in this series and if they do win this series in the NBA Finals.